Oh, Steph, I heard you trying to get on to the Green Buildings Zoom meeting yesterday, but you couldn't connect?
Um, yeah, I'm not sure, and I probably didn't click properly, but the questions I had were answered. So it was good, and I'm sure tonight more will be answered.
Yep.
Okay, so I believe we are live streaming. So
You have
this
me
is
now?
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did it on the phone. It worked fine, yeah. That's weird. Really weird.
Steve is back.
All right. So this is the joint environmental zoning and land use committee meeting. The date is January 31st. The time is 7:04. We are together to discuss the green fast track rule change through the Department of City Planning. I believe, Josephine, if you wanted to show, do you want to start with the PowerPoint for those who weren't able to see it?
Sure. Okay, can everyone see it?
Yes.
So this is the green fast track for environmental review. By the New York City Department of City Planning, the rule change that was proposed. The agenda, issues facing New York City, the New York City Environmental Review Overview, Green Fast Track, the timeline and implementation of the rule change. So city planning explained that New York City is facing a crisis. The city grapples with a climate and housing crisis exacerbated by outdated development rules. Current environmental review rules do not encourage smart growth. According to DCP, current rules do not incentivize energy efficient development. The complexity and cost of environmental review impedes low carbon footprint housing projects near public transit. Urgent reform is needed to align with climate goals. The city can build housing faster. Environmental review rules hinder new housing by imposing costs and delays. Addressing these issues can lead to more affordable housing. The green fast track would help achieve both climate and housing goals. This proposal creates a path to allow the construction of small and medium apartments in areas that have consistently shown no environmental impact faster and with less red tape. 2, New York City Environmental Review Overview. Unlisted and type 1 actions require environmental review pursuant to the city's Environmental Quality Review, or SEQR. So there are 3 action classes: unlisted, type 1, and type 2. Actions facilitating development projects require environmental review when discretionary approvals or permits are required from a city agency to facilitate development. The proposal requires city funding. The proposal is being directly undertaken by a city agency. So type 2 development actions are less complicated and move into public review much faster than others. So I guess this is the green, the green track, unlike the unlisted and type 1 that seems to have a little bit more steps and review for their SEQR action determination. So every agency is authorized to adopt its own type 2 list. Some of the agencies that do this are New York City Planning, which this is their rule change, the Mayor's Office of Environmental Coordination, New York City Department of Housing Preservation and Development, and the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals. And what DCP explained during the presentation on Monday is that each agency will develop its own rule changes. The agency must establish that the actions will have no significant adverse impact on the environment and not be a type 1 action. So expanding type 2 eligibility would simplify the process, benefiting both applicants and the city. And here they separate increase, 2 columns, an increased column, predictability of approval timelines, the development of small and medium apartments, and affordable housing production. Decreased cost associated with consultants, land holding, and financing, opportunity costs for applicants, time spent producing environmental review documents for projects with no impacts, waiting times for the review of non-type 2 projects. The Green Fast Track. So the Green Fast Track Type 2 would only apply to projects that have a proven track record of no environmental impacts. So here they have a graph of completed applications from 2013 to 2023 by lead agency review. So you could see overall DCP had the greatest number of 443, with 388 that had a negative declaration, 34 a positive, and 21 a conditional negative declaration. BSA had 330, with only 3 that had a conditional negative declaration. HPD 291 with 7 that had a positive declaration, and the Office of I forget what that acronym is, remedial, the city's Office of Environmental Remediation had 90, was that 51? 51, no, is it? That's kind of odd.
Yeah, 51.
Yeah, it looks like 69 at the top though, right, Dan?
It's
69 in total.
17 were declared
With
negative.
17, yes, okay, with 17 that were declared a positive declaration. So the research led to strict criteria that consistently resulted in no environmental impacts. The public would still have opportunities to participate in the public review process. So the most common environmental issues identified in review are either density related or site specific issues. In density related, issues from the proposed size of the development in relation to its environment most often includes issues related to transportation, community facilities, and construction. Site specific issues that were identified include issues stemming from the development's contextual environment, most often include issues related to air quality, historic resources, hazardous materials, noise, and resiliency. The Green Fast Track enables a faster pathway to public review for modest housing projects depending on their location and size. To the left, R5 to R10 residential, commercial, and manufacturing zoning districts, and then to the right, R1 to R4 residential zoning districts. So housing proposals in R5 to R10 districts would be eligible if they have up to 250 dwelling units. They must have 1 to 250 new dwelling units, up to 35,000 gross square feet of non-residential uses, individual limits to commercial or community facility use, a regulatory agreement in commercial and manufacturing districts, and meet all criteria. An increment of 175 units is proposed for R1 to R4 districts. Must have 1 to 175 new dwelling units and up to 20,000 gross square feet of non-residential uses, individual limits on commercial and community facility use, and meet all other criteria. The Green Fast Track would support climate goals. Buildings must have electric heating and hot water. Excludes proposals in vulnerable coastal areas. I think in the presentation they had a map of, they went really into specifics on the coastal areas. I don't see a slide here. The Green Fast Track would also promote environmental justice and exclude projects near polluting sources, require protection in high ambient noise areas, exclude areas with industrial emissions, exclude areas near major roads, require remediation of areas with environmental hazards. The Green Fast Track would preserve key safeguards to public spaces and resources, required LPC review and protection for historic sites. LPC is the Landmarks Preservation Commission. And second, excludes projects next to parks or containing natural resources. So DCP's research indicates that the net effect of these type 2 eligibility rules would be substantial. If these rules had been in effect 10 years ago, approximately 12,000 new housing units could have been built more quickly and efficiently. Most of New York City's land area would be potentially eligible. So the green are potentially eligible areas and the gray is ineligible areas. So the gray is all parkland for the most part from what I see on this map. So these types of projects would benefit from Green Fast Track. The Northeastern Towers, Seventh-day Adventist, FAC, and Mega 160 income restricted senior units and a senior center. 3285 Fulton Street, MHANY and Cypress Hills Local Development Corp., 33 senior units and a daycare, no environmental impacts. The Hannigan, HPD, CUCS, and Breaking Ground, 117 supportive housing units and on-site services. So timeline and implementation. The City's Administrative Procedure Act, or known as CAPA, is the way that city agencies create or amend rules. CAPA encourages engagement with the public and transparency in the rulemaking process. So CPC approval to begin CAPA, it publishes the rules supporting the statement and EAS, public hearing and public comments, adjustments, and the CPC vote. Final rule is published within the effective date. So just in terms of this particular Green Fast Track for Housing rule proposal, the upcoming public hearing is set for February 7 at 10 a.m. So we're currently in that small window of review. Implementation tools are in development. The goal is that these tools will help applicants and DCP teams identify eligible proposals as early as possible in the pre-certification process. Some criteria will be geographically based and easily verified with automated tools. Other criteria will require confirmations from lead or involved agencies, like processes that happen today. So Green Fast Track takeaways, 1, data-driven. This proposal is led by research of involving 10 years of projects. 2, public involvement. Public review will remain robust in the process. 3, environmentally sound. This path will address density-related site-specific environmental concerns. 4, housing issues addressed. The expanded Type 2 list will lead to efficient approval of sustainable housing projects. And that is all. There ends the proposal. So I'm going to stop the share. And so essentially what we are tasked with is submitting comments to the Department of City Planning on their proposal. And Tracy, I'll turn it back to you to open it up to questions or.
Sure,
Go
we'll open up to questions and comments. Steve, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm wondering, I just want to make sure you can hear me this time. But I'm wondering about SEQR, okay, CEQR, right, City Environmental Quality Review, right, is actually the way the City of New York has met the standards for SEQR, which is the State Environmental Quality Review Act. My question here is that they're talking about changing SEQR and asking us to weigh in on this. Have they asked the state yet if this was passed, would it work with SEQR? I don't see any point whatsoever in going through with something saying, yeah, we like it, when the state says, I'm sorry, it doesn't meet the criteria for SEQR. I'm really confused by this.
I think that it's something where there is the existing Type 2 declaration, so they're trying to change certain types of projects to instead. Currently, the things under like Type 2 are like a parking lot of less than 75 75 spots, or a housing development of less than 10 units, very minor things, and those probably do meet state standard to bypass. But I think they're trying to put
but that doesn't answer my question.
Exactly. Whether we can do this with all of our housing stock is a really open question.
My point is that this is putting the cart before the horse. They're asking us to approve something before they have the state saying that they would approve it, because this is a subset of the state. Joe, am I wrong here?
I think there are different thresholds for SEQR, what types of projects go under just city review and the thresholds that meet the state review. I think they're separate.
Agreed 100%. But the point is that if the state is not in line with this, because they're changing what the state has approved works in SEQR, right? State has to approve that, saying, hey, these criteria work. I'm just totally confused as to how we just decide that we're gonna go forward and change secra, which was approved by the state and now is going to be a new secra that has not been approved by the state. It just seems to me that those rules, before they put them out to us, should really be something that the state looks at first. What's the point of voting on things if the state's going to say we would never approve that? I don't, I haven't seen, I'm not saying that I'm right. I want that to be clear. I just want to make sure I understand, or that we all understand what I'm saying here. That this is, it literally says that this is the standard that the city uses to meet the state's standard. Now we're changing the city standard. So, I mean, and I'm assuming that the state has always accepted seeker because it meets their standard.
Right, but because the city has the ability to create standards under secret review, this rule change, as I understand it, fast tracks that process by creating this set of rules that basically exempts a lot of the review processes that now they have deemed by their research, because they've had so many that have had, positive results and didn't have a negative declaration, that they're saying it's a waste of time basically to go through all of this in certain types of projects. So they're looking to streamline that so that developers don't have to go through extensive environmental reviews, and save all of that time so that building can take place a lot faster.
Yeah, and from what I get is that they're not changing the process by which seeker really works. They're
right.
just kind of using an existing pipeline in the seeker process,
Correct.
which is the type 2 declaration, and they're changing like the content that's going through the pipeline without actually changing anything about the pipeline. So that's probably how they're getting around.
So they're assuming that the state will say yes.
I think, and from what I've seen from just what the city has been, like the city's webpage has like a big list of all the organizations that are behind this. And there are a lot of statewide organizations that are like in support of the city's change. So I feel like they've done that process, but I wouldn't be able to.
But I just want to finish here. I know everybody'd like to speak, but it just seems to me that what you're saying is that it seems like, I'm hearing this seems like, I'm not hearing the answer to the question, does the state approve this? Has it approved it? Are we voting on something that we're asking the state to approve? Or what are we doing here?
Right, so what we're here is to provide comments, so we're not voting yes or no, but to supply, really to provide comments. Because this is an agency's way of changing their internal rules of how they review these types of applications. So they're changing the way and they're fast tracking the way they review these secret, applications. So this is not really up for us to review and vote up or down, but more so to submit comments to them, to the agency on its decision to change their rule process.
Then under those circumstances, I think one thing that we should ask them is that very question. Has this already been approved by the state, or is this something that we're voting on that has not been approved by the state and could be thrown out? Because it just seems to me, again, the cart is before the horse.
It appears on their paperwork that I have that they reference both secra and seeker as like together.
But they're not.
So, right. But as far as like how they are phrasing it, that it's, they sasatisfy the conditions of both.
Right, so we can certainly ask that question.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
Okay, I know Elizabeth had your hand raised next.
Oh, you're muted.
Oh,
okay, I'm unmuted. I don't know if I'm answering Steve's question or not, but as I read it, the city believes that there's a delegation of authority from the state such that they have rulemaking discretion here. So to amend the rules. So I think it doesn't, as I read it, it didn't matter whether the state approved or not, but I'm not familiar with this area at all.
But if in fact that were true, then they could just say we're going to do away with it altogether. See, that's what, and that doesn't make any sense. I don't think the state would just say, oh, you can forget about secret.
Right. I mean, it does seem like an interesting way to use the existing framework of delegation of authority. I don't know.
Yeah.
Agree.
I hear what you're saying, Steve.
Anne?
Yeah. One thing that concerns me is why they have to cloak it with the word green. There's actually very little green about this proposal. And in fact, I think that the New York City Building Code has the green covered and continues to do so and impose more and more green directions, which is great. But it just makes me a little suspicious, and perhaps there's like smoke and mirrors to call it the green fast track. I mean, truth be told, it's just a fast track. Forget the green. The green's happening anyway.
Absolutely.
Yes.
You said
So,
that.
yeah, so
Yeah.
that's my point.
Yeah, I can speak after Dean on some of that specifically. I've done some research on this for this particular rule change.
Right. Dean?
Yeah, I might have been looking at this incorrectly, having listened to what Steve said, but my feeling up until this point was not that we're changing the rules as much as certain projects that fill a profile will be exempted from the rules. Now, I don't know if that's the right way to look at it, but up until this point, that's how I was looking at it. And in terms of green, I think they can legitimately say green because it meets, all electric building or all electric stoves, that stuff, which is part of the green aspect of new buildings. Thank you.
Yeah. So I did some research on some of the qualifications that, again, to specifically address the green part first. The only green element in the policy change is for all electric conversion on, water heaters, et cetera, right? The problem is that local law 154 is already in effect mandating. So we've already kind of had meetings about how that was going to change by default for every single residential unit in the city. So looping it into this fast track basically means that every housing development, period, will be eligible for this type 2 fast track under 175 units in, 1 to 5, 250 and 5+. So it's every housing development, period, that will be eligible for the fast track. And the other part is that they also talked a lot about, affordability. For their 3 examples, they put, like senior housing and things like that. But the rule text doesn't state explicitly that it has to be income restricted. It says normal dwelling units or income restricted. So this is just all housing projects, essentially especially a neighborhood like Bay Ridge, will be immune to not just the EIS, the impact statements, but even submitting an environmental assessment statement, an EAS, which is just a 9-page checklist. And they won't have to submit that. Yeah, there'll still be a public review process, but we will be undertaking a public review process without even basic documentation from the developer about what they intend to do, period. And they also haven't released, they said they really studied 1,000 EAS statements.
Applications, right.
There's definitely been more than 1,000 in the last decade in New York City. So what was their criteria for selecting these 1,000? And it has not been released. It's not public data, and it's been foiled and not released.
And that was brought up during the public meeting the other night. That specific question is, where is the data? And there was a member of the public who said that they had actually a group that organized to say that some of the EASs that had been submitted and approved provided inaccuracies and inaccurate information, and they actually took it to court. So that point was raised, absolutely, is, we haven't seen the data. And that should have been released, and it hasn't been.
Yeah, because they could have just selected, 90% 2-family housing projects and said, hey, most of these don't qualify for environmental review, so why don't we eliminate it all the time for, again, 175 unit projects? The existing type 2 is 10 or under units. So they're going to expand that out to 175.
May I
and-
ask a quick question?
Mhm.
May I ask a quick question? Josephine, how many residential developments do we have existing in Bay Ridge that exceed 175 units? What is it? Shore Hill? How many units is that?
Right, yeah, Short Hill, definitely, the Bay Ridge Towers, you know, is 400, definitely Short Hill.
It's pretty much it, I think.
Right, but it's, the numbers are 1, 2, so it's not, I mean, the numbers are 1 to 175.
Yeah, it's 1 to
So
175.
it could be a 4-unit building, it could be
Yeah.
a 20-unit building. It's, you know, some of the publics, they explain that at city planning because that was a confusing question. Are you only speaking about larger developments? But no, the reason why that range in the R1 to R5 was 1 to 175 is because it incorporates all those numbers. So it could be for smaller developments as well.
Mhm.
Right, so that's my point. It's basically everything we have in Bay Ridge.
Yes.
It's
Right.
everything.
Yeah.
Yes. Correct.
No EAS, no EIS for everything that conceivably could be constructed under zoning law in Bay Ridge.
Stephanie?
Tracy, can you confirm, or Josephine, that this would go into effect regardless of the outcome of City of Yes housing opportunity, that this would apply to everything? Or that was
Yes.
not discussed?
Yes.
Mhm.
Okay, and the other thing that I thought was problematic from the other night, I know that they did not give a very, they didn't fill me with confidence when they're talking about concurrent projects or projects that are somewhat co-located and determining the impact on one another in the environmental review. I don't think there was anything definitive. Is there?
No.
Okay,
I agree with that. And that point was definitely raised.
okay.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Oh, Carmelo? Oh, you're on mute.
I'm sorry, I have to unmute. The way it seems to me is they're exempting a whole big class of development under the assumption that we've worked with these people before and there are existing environmental rules, and don't worry about it, you don't have to do anything about
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
And what I want to know is, let's say, for example, that holds true for 99%. How do we affect that 1% as a community? How do we affect the guy who, yeah, probably did a lot of good developing, and in this one, he's not meeting the criteria? But you exempted him because, you know, he's a nice guy and he's done it before. So where's our button, our big red button that we get to press and say, no, you can't do this? Because it seems like up to 175 units, they could do what they want.
Yeah,
Am I
that
right
was-
or wrong?
Yeah, they brought that up in the meeting that the EAS, the assessment is one of our ways of holding them accountable, where they have to state, you know, how many dwelling units they intend on building. We won't have that data for any development.
So basically, they just open the door, and it's nothing. None of this is environmental because Ann's right. You know, I've been working in this industry for a million years, and New York City building codes are up to like the highest, like elite bronze. You know, so we've been building smart buildings for a million years. But to open up to 175 units and we have no recourse makes me really nervous. And that should be a question asked to them. What is our recourse? Let them go on record and tell us. You got to go to the building department. You got to make a case. You got to do this. They should be able to tell us, right?
Mhm.
They should be able to say to us, you know, you have your perfect example is that 1 to 175 units all falls under that. I said, what when it doesn't? What do we have to do to stop it or change it?
Absolutely.
Or yeah, that's all I want to know. That's it. It's simple.
My concern
you.
as well is that the designation for type 2 happens prior to the public,
Yes.
right? So once again, how do you get the data? How do you know what was provided as proof Because by the time it comes
trust
to the
them.
public session, like, what
Mhm.
happened,
It's
like,
done.
it's already
It's
there,
done.
done. It's already done.
Approved. It's probably under construction.
Well, I'm having deja vu about this one. It's like the last one we did, the text amendment.
Steve, do you still have your hand up for,
Pardon me?
Thank you.
Steve, do you still have your hand up?
Yeah, I'll put it down.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sorry, I won't do that again.
Elizabeth, you had your hand up again?
Yeah, sure. I had just two comments about it. I noticed that it said small and medium apartments. I think there should be some ability to look for slightly larger apartments, which is why a lot of families are moving out. So that's just something that I thought was interesting with this, in terms of a housing crisis issue. And then it said in the documents that if we had put this in effect 10 years ago, we'd have 12,000 new units now. And that actually didn't sound like very much to me. I mean, given, we have a city of like 11 million people. So, I mean, I that's more 12,000 more than we have now, but it's not that many. And then I get the other thing and maybe this is maybe more of a question than a comment, but I didn't see anything about the sewer system and the issues with that. And that concerned me because I mean, that's obviously an issue in Bay Ridge and many areas around the city that we have this aging infrastructure. So that's all I had to say about that.
No, and certainly, Elizabeth, we have those concerns here in certain portions of the district. And really, a lot of them are the most densely portions of the district, and adding loads to the Owl's Head sewage treatment catchment area is 5 community districts.
Yeah.
And it was built in 1954. I'm looking at Dan, so he can
Yeah,
correct me, but yeah, so that was not mentioned, the added loads with additional development and impacts on infrastructure. And that's something we can add to our comments.
Which is, I feel, why it's imperative before this ever goes to approval, at least from our comments, is that we need to see what those 1,000 studies were. Because where were they done? Were they all in Manhattan? Right? Like, we don't know. You're opening up a floodgate for I want more residential development, but bypassing all environmental review, at least tell me what you base this data on. If none of those projects were in our catchment area or or a single family zoning type area, or weren't, what are you applying this data to? They say they have 1,000. Well, what are they? It's public data. They're EASs. You can release them. You don't need to go through and redact stuff. They should just say which ones they used for the study. That's very.
Why do I get the feeling that this is just a same old story
Absolutely.
with DCP? It's just a perpetual, don't worry about it. It's in the details when we don't have the details.
You're absolutely
Nobody
right.
has the detail. Is it this administration or is this the way it's always been? Just curious.
Well, we haven't done something like this in a long time.
I know.
That's my point.
Jane
I know.
Marie, our chair is here and has her hand raised, so we'll yield to you, Jane.
Hey, thank you. I have to say, when I tuned in and I'm hearing about, the other night at their presentation and that it was presented as this green fast track, this environmental review, the fact that they were bypassing reviews and doing this felt more like it was green as in financial fast track.
That's good.
Larry, and then Richard. Larry, you're on mute. You still on mute, Larry?
There we go.
Okay, there you go.
Could the ulterior motive between this exercise just to avoid not in my backyard? Go to fast track enough reviews, just try to the 175, that's a very large number. Imagine we have much room in the neighborhood for this stuff in the district for such a big development like that 175.
Yeah. I mean,
are there any equivalent 175 units? You say from 10 units now going to 100.
So Larry, but these are, I mean, it's not described as units that would require a special permit or would require a variance. I mean, these are as of right projects for the most part. I mean, at least that's what was presented to us. So I don't see that as this being a NIMBY. at all, because if it's within the zoning, again, it's a wide, range of units, 1 to 175. So,
Like 1 to 10.
I think that the requirement for environmental review and the environmental, the EAS is really basic and does hold the developer, to performing that review, and that seems to now be completely bypassed
Yeah.
this rule change. Richard, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, just two quick things. One, and it looked like there were about 7 developments in CB10 that are greater than 175 units. A bunch of them looked like they were on Shore Road. Just based on some data I just looked at. And then the other thing that I just wanted to bring up is that this says that these projects must be located outside of the most vulnerable coastal areas, which is kind of funny to me. I'm wondering like what that's actually based off of, if those are like updated like flood maps and things like that or not, because we tend to not update things. So I'm just wondering what that's based off of and think that that should be taken into consideration in
That
addition
was
to this.
mentioned. That was mentioned. There was a map that they did present that wasn't part of this slide. And so they did highlight the coastal area. So in our district, it's of course the coastline because we're on a ridge. But I think there was 5 or 6 neighborhoods that were highlighted. I think one was Garrison Beach in Brooklyn. That's the one that comes to mind. And then there were a few in Manhattan. They did identify those. I'm sorry it wasn't in this PowerPoint that was on ZAP, but it was a slide that was included in the and they said it was based on the, I guess, most recent flood maps, Richard.
The another
Okay.
one was Broad Channel in Queens. There's
Mhm.
another one, but our area, Bay Ridge, was not part of that.
No,
Although we were in the plain, we were not part of those 5, I think it was 4 or 5 communities. Garrison
Right,
Beach,
I
Broad
don't-
Channel, a few more. We were not in that.
Yeah, I don't think we're really at risk for that, but
No.
climate change is a thing and
yes,
vulnerable coastal areas will change over time. So I just want to bring that
Mhm.
up.
thank you. Good point. Anne, you have your hand raised again?
Yeah, when you go on a trip and you want to get from point A to point B and get there faster, fast track your trip, one approach would be not to make any stops. And the other approach would be to stop for a shorter time period at each stop. Point being, could they not consider a fast track approach that just minimizes the time between each stop? Must we have no stops on this journey?
Yeah.
Good, I like that.
I like that approach as well.
If they wanted to like remove the streamline EAS so that it's less likely to trigger an EIS, which is extensive for certain size projects, they could try to reform the EAS process after you submit one. But saying you don't even have to fill out a checklist, it's like going to a doctor and you don't have to fill out your medical history.
I don't
And just-
understand why any property would not have an EAS.
Yeah.
I don't understand why any development of a tent community to a high-rise building, we wouldn't want to see that
Absolutely.
someone checked all the boxes.
Absolutely.
I don't want to believe that these guys are okay because they usually check all the boxes. I want to see that the boxes are checked. This is basic stuff.
Yeah.
These people are crazy.
And it doesn't change the public review process. So it's not like it's like trying to avoid like NIMBYs shutting down affordable housing, because we still get that
Right.
public review. It just hamstrings anyone's ability to hold a developer to the fire and say, you said you would do, 100 units and you're clearly building 500. And here's where you wrote that you're bypassing the expensive EIS because you said that this has happened before, where developers have said that they are building only X number of units to bypass doing the EIS for extremely large mega projects, and then they just happen to build more during construction. And the only way to hold them accountable is pointing at that EAS and saying, this is why we fast-tracked you, as you said you had less. But now we're just going to do it by default, and they don't even have to submit the documentation. I don't understand how we could perform our duty as a community board without the data of an EAS in the public review session.
Right.
I
I
agree.
totally agree.
That's a really good point, Dan.
Like, so if they wanted to amend this process to also eliminate public review, that would be a little bit more honest. But yeah,
Don't be surprised if that's not the next step.
yeah.
6 months down the road, they'll say, you know what, maybe these projects don't even need public review because they're as of right, and we know they do their
Exactly right.
environmental due diligence. They know they do their environmental due diligence because of X, Y, and Z. So there's no public review, community board, big ugats, and that's the way it works.
Dean and then Issa?
Yeah, I think in our comments, we should just put in our comments, we want an EAS performed, period. Whether or not they have to follow that up with the EIS, I don't say they have to, but at least we should have the EAS, number one. And number two, to follow up on what what Jane Marie said, this is all about the money. It's going to make the projects go faster, which is money. And as they said in the meeting the other night, it's going to save some developers up to $100,000 in costs. So it's all about the money for sure, as Jane Marie kind of indicated. But I definitely think we should put it, we want an EAS done for the projects and let them do what they want after that.
There should be an EAS requirement.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
they want to streamline the EAS requirement, that's on them. If they want to make it easy, they want to develop an app, they want to have a smaller box of checks, go right ahead. But there still needs to be a statement. Somebody's got to do the diligence there.
Yeah, you have to have something that you can go back to and say, hey, you guys said this, all right? Right now, you don't have that.
Okay, Issa
Or you
has
won't have it. You won't have it under this.
So will this apply to locations or properties that were once operating under hazardous situations like auto body parts stores or, auto part stores or gas stations? Would that fast track still give them the
Yes.
capabilities to go through that process quicker?
I don't know if that would be tech.
Yeah, some of them might not. I believe that they have, if it's classified as like an E grade, like a hazard site, it still has to go through the standard process. It would be considered a type 1.
For DCP.
For DCP, but other agencies might not need that and decide to fast track it for themselves.
Right, so what they did mention here is that the other agencies that perform these types of reviews also are looking at doing rule changes. So if this is for the Department of City Planning, but that Office of Environmental Remediation, which is a relatively new agency, we will keep an eye on, because the board does receive notifications of rule changes, agencies change their rules quite often. The board doesn't comment on most of them. I think we've had a few sanitation recent rule changes that we've submitted comments on. But this one, certainly, significant that we are paying attention to it and want to submit comments to it.
Yeah. Another thing that's in that PowerPoint presentation that is a little tricky is they do state, when they state like, hey, if we did this 10 years ago, we'd have, what is it, like 1,100, what is it?
I think they said 12,000.
12,000 new, but the thing is, they didn't say we'd have 12,000 new housing units. We just have 12,000 units that were built faster. They didn't say new. This isn't about building even new housing.
Right.
It's just about building them faster, which is hilarious that whatever study they did do, it isn't even focused on new housing. It's just speed.
Fast housing.
Pierre?
Is this like the city of Yes that has to be approved by the city council for this change to take place?
I don't think so. I think this is an agency change, Pierre, that has a public hearing, and then it goes back to the city planning commission for a vote. Let's see. Yeah, so under the charter section 45, the process is generally takes a minimum of 60 days. So it goes to the public, and then the agency reviews the is empowered to adopt rules. So they're empowered to adopt rules for their own agency.
No, so there's not much we can do about it.
But it is a public process, and we can go on the record and make these comments.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, I don't see any more hands raised.
Well,
So, okay.
Are we convinced that this is a good thing? They want to speed everything up. And my question is the old expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And my question is, what do they really believe that there's that for what reason? I'm just trying to understand this. Is this driven by the developers who just want to go faster and that's it? Do they have
on their fact sheet, they say, why is green fast track needed? Because today's environmental review process puts unnecessary burdens on modest, sustainable housing projects. And to tackle our city's housing crisis, we must remove these burdens to bring New Yorkers the high-quality housing they need. The Department of City Planning analyzed more than 1,000 environmental reviews over the last decade, and they consistently found that modest housing projects with certain characteristics had no negative impacts on the environment.
Yeah.
So
That sounds like it was written by a developer.
Yeah.
Like Toll Brothers. Like Toll Brothers wrote that for them.
You know,
Like they write
this-
our laws in Congress, they did the same there.
This sounds like so many of the other City of Yes proposals.
Yes.
The concept is good, the ideas are good, but it's taken to the ultimate extreme. And that's what we've been seeing with everything. They're taking it to the extreme, and they're doing it again.
Yep.
Leo Dan, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, fascinating topic. I just want to point out and then kind of give a little bit of my experience because I've been dealing with this stuff for quite a bit of time. And from what I can tell you, that the larger projects and the deep-pocketed developers don't really have problems with environmental reviews for a couple of reasons. First of all, they come in and hire architects, hire lawyers, hire their folks that are put together this kind of reviews for them, and they can flow the millions of dollars that it takes to get a project pre-approved and to go through the this kind of review process. Is not a problem for them to float a couple of $1 million for this to happen. Now, what that does is essentially pushing for a real estate market that is more skewed towards the luxury market, because again, it's so expensive to pre-approve and then approve a project because of all the rulemakings that are kind of put in place right now. That what comes up at the end is that the products that they're putting out, the housing, to meet and to pay for the cost of the land and the cost and the time that it takes to get all this pre-approval and all this headache, or not headache, but work that needs to happen. It puts it so that at the end of the game, for them to make money, it has to be kind of a luxury product. And I do think that some of this, I'm not saying that everything that like we're talking about, I think that that a minimum kind of review process should be probably kind of be still in place. It makes sense. I'm not saying that it doesn't make sense, and it protects the public to a certain degree, but also making the process either easier or removing certain scale of buildings will make it so that, I'm not going to say mom and pop developers, but developers that are, in the game for, smaller buildings could actually, build middle income housing and housing that is kind of in the middle, because the housing that is getting built right now is in the two scales. It's either the ultra luxury that we see that is getting built because of what I just explained, or agencies that are getting money floated to them to develop affordable housing. So that's kind of a subsidized process. In other words, they're getting money to go through the same process and go through the same kind of headache to get this housing. But nevertheless, the reason why it could be affordable housing at the end of the day is because there's money that grants and all the things that kind of come into play for lower and affordable housing projects to go through. But we're not seeing a lot of middle income housing being built. And again, that's not only a problem here in New York, that's a problem in a lot of major cities here in the US right now, that is skewing towards the super high end or the very low end, and nothing kind of is getting built in the middle, which is, a huge problem, because, most people kind of fall in the middle end of the scale. And the last thing that I'm going to add, Steve, can I please you?
Sure.
The last thing that I want to add is I also don't have a lot of confidence in these documents that get put out, because if you, what I'm trying to say, these declarations and the environmental reviews are, to say kindly, they're kind of like gross triaging of projects to the way that you can make a whale look like it weighs 10 pounds. So a lot of the information that this document is already that is already making it into these documents to go through the process. It's a long process, but at the end of the day, the data is skewed and to the point that it's not even probably the reality at the end of the day. So that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Steve?
Yeah, I'm a little confused though, Leodan. What I'm hearing you saying, to me sounds like, well, we should make. Are you suggesting we should reduce the environmental impact review for affordable housing, as opposed to what the developers do for high scale? Okay, because if you do that, it really doesn't make any difference from an environmental impact point of view. I mean, if something is bad from an environmental point of view, regardless of whether it's for affordable housing or very rich housing, is irrelevant. Because what it does, if we're saying, well, we're going to skip it for affordable housing, that still impacts everybody. And so I don't see how we can decide that we're just going to kind of put it to the side, if that's what you mean. If not, I'd like to understand it.
Yeah, I can answer that. So, I mean, if you look at this documentation, it deals with a couple of things. First of all, like parking is one of them that, and it's a big one in this documentation. For example, like, if you're adding a lot of parking to your buildings, that's going to, surcharge the local streets and whatnot, and you need to have a traffic engineer kind of prove that that whatever you're doing is not going to be kind of a hazard to the project. The majority of the projects that are kind of approved here in New York City under the current ruling actually precludes. I'm talking about buildings. I'm not talking about single family or in specific districts. You don't have to provide parking. So that's something already that I think is one of the reasons that they're probably kind of looking at a certain class of buildings and properties that don't even that some of the studies are completely irrelevant, and that's one of the reasons that they're saying. I mean, and I'm not trusting. I listened to the call the other day, and I agree with everything that's been said. We want to see the data that they're using to even come. They said data driven. What they're kind of suggesting. We want to see the data, or at least get a sense of the subset of information that they fed into all the projects that they're saying that they didn't have that had a negative declaration at the end of the process. So I want to stand what to say that we need to see the information. I'm not completely, but then the other thing that I'm getting back is, like, for example, some of the new codes that are kind of coming in and are being mandated, as Anne and some other folks here have already said, we're pushing away from gas and moving everything to electric. So that's already I guess yet another study, or methaning or whatnot, that you don't have to kind of conduct for your buildings, because it's kind of moving into this direction. So what they're kind of getting at is that buildings of a certain scale, if they follow the building code and the current zoning codes, should be precluded because they don't amount to what would we normally be kind of a hazard to the community. I'm pointing out kind of the argument that I'm kind of pointing, and I'm saying, like, we need to see the information and see how this kind of pans out. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would just say that, as far as I'm trying to think of comments that we could put on, and I'd say number one would be they should release the 1,000+ EAS study. Just that should be public.
Yeah.
As a comment, what data are they using? And I don't think that we've spoken extensively about how this really doesn't have much of an environmental aspect to it, because it's only in the policy text. The only environmental declaration is about electric heaters, which is already city policy. So this isn't doing anything to make more green buildings. So I think that should be stripped from their policy statements, period.
Yeah.
They should try to advertise it as such. And the same thing with affordability, where there is no affordability requirement to this fast tracking. So just make it about housing. Publicly state that it's just about housing and release the data. And that would be honest. And, I agree that we are in a horrible housing crisis and things need to be fixed. But, and then finally, we should state that EASs should at least be submitted. Maybe they should review this and change it so that you change the conditions under which an EIS is then triggered for certain size projects. That could eliminate, maybe the EAS requirements. There's an EAS light for certain size projects where they don't have to conduct like extensive traffic studies or something like that. But EASs are minor in the overall scheme of things. So they could reform that process rather than fast tracking everything. And we spoke before about this being extreme. It is extreme. So mitigating that down to something that works with EAS more closely, so CB boards can perform their duties and checking that data. Because I agree, EASs are skewed data, to Leodan's point, that changes over the course of the project, but it at least is a point of data to reference. And one of the only ones that we have. So it would be nice to keep them.
And to Elizabeth's point, even within that EAS, speaking about the sewage infrastructure and the loads that, that needs to be, identified as a data point, because,
Wouldn't that fall under the EAS?
Well, yeah, if it's not, but if it's not going to be there,
but it
right,
would be
exactly
exempted, right?
Yes. So
okay, so Dan, that's four comments.
So those are my.
Those are your four. Okay,
those are my four.
And
Dan and other people who listen to the webinar 2 nights ago, wasn't the first person to pose a question was an African-American woman. I forgot her name.
Alicia Boyd.
Okay. I believe that she said that she could not find the data on the website about the 1,000 projects. And I
Yes.
believe that they directed her as to where on the website to find that information. Anybody
bel-
else recollect that?
I
do-
recollect that.
I could not find it.
I could not find it either.
And a couple of activist groups have put up YouTube documentation subsequently that state that they have been foiling it. So perhaps it has been released by a foil, but I wouldn't know where to. But
I couldn't find it.
yeah,
So what they said was, can't you just put it in if it's there, why don't you just put a link so we could click it and look at the data? I couldn't find it. I don't know if anyone's, Stephanie, did you look for it? I know you were looking.
I did, but I'm not really sure. They have under that tab that said public documents, because I spent a good deal of time the other night looking, but I don't know that any of those documents reflect the 1,000.
No.
I mean, you see the documents, don't you, under the public documents tab? You've all looked, or those of you who've looked at it. So.
Yeah, I've been through the whole, or like I went through and I was unable to locate unless there was something very buried.
No, and they don't make it easy to find, even these. It's not user friendly, the site.
so if it has been made public in the last few days, our comment should just be to extend the period in which people can then analyze that data. If it's only been out, because if it is public, it probably has only been public for a day or two.
That's a good point.
And it really is a short window when you think about that, having the public meeting on January 29th and the public hearing, and they're not required. I mean, they're absolutely correct. You know, the speaker says we're not required to do this, but we're doing this, and it's important to do this because it is a big change in their policy. So we're grateful for that, but you know, it is a quick turnaround to even submit comments to you know, their public hearing is on the 7th, and I think we have, you know, like 2 weeks after that to actually submit the comments to them. Are there any more other than Dan's list here? Adding the loads on the sewage and water infrastructure.
Oh, and Steve's point about whether this is state approved.
Okay. Anyone else? So Dan, is that a motion?
Yeah, that is. I make a motion to add those comments for our submission.
Okay. Since we don't have an in-person forum, Dean has seconded it. So we can take a vote, but we are going to require a second at the board meeting. So any discussion? I don't see any. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Any opposed? Abstentions, recusals?
Recusal.
Elizabeth, you're
My last
I'm
recusal.
recusing, yeah.
My last
Okay.
recusal. You have that?
I have it. I have your recusal. Got it.
My last recusal.
This is Larry's last recusal.
Oh,
He will be retiring from Department of Buildings.
hey,
Congratulations.
Okay.
Congratulations, Larry.
Congratulations.
And thank you, hey, Larry, and thank you for your service too, for all those years.
I think Larry said 40 years, Larry, is it 40?
With the city, yes, 40 and a half.
That's great, Larry. Thank you very much.
Buildings,
Okay.
23. So.
All right. Well, that's it. We have a list. Thank you all. Tracy, I'll turn it back to you. I think that's all we have on the agenda tonight.
Okay. I'm drawing a blank on what my next is.
We have a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, sorry, I'm not up to speed today.
Thank
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Yes. I see everyone's hands, yes. All
right.
right, everyone, have a good evening.
Good night,
Thank
all.
you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.